State never led in this game. Middle Tennessee's had the lead the whole way. That's it. The Blue Raiders of Middle Tennessee, a 15 seed, has won it, and they are moving on.
Rewind about a week, and the end of the game against Old Dominion was, it was climactic. They missed a shot. We got the win, sudden victory.
They look to bring it in. They do so to Baycoat. Baycoat takes half-court shot, is up there and tipped up. No good! No good! Middle Tennessee wins the Conference USA Championship. Put a nickel in the jukebox. Play the Tennessee Waltz. We are going dancing. What about that, baby? How about that?
You know, when I think about the Michigan State game, I really think about, I go back to Selection Sunday. And we're all gathered in the Hall of Fame, and we're all wondering, what's our seed going to be and who we're going to play. And this was the first time in the history of the selection show that the bracket actually was leaked out early before the announcement. So we're starting to get all these text messages and phone notifications that we're a 15 and we're playing Michigan State. And I'm really distraught about that because, number one, I thought that Michigan State should be a 1 seed. There was a lot of talk that how they shouldn't be a 2, they should be a 1. But more to the point, I didn't think we were a 15. I thought we were a 13 or so. And so I thought both sides got seeded incorrectly. And so we left that Selection Sunday, and myself and even members of the basketball staff were a little bit down about the seed and the matchup.
Numerous times I've told people that I feel like on that day, I was the most unique sports fan in the world. Growing up just outside of Lansing, Michigan, born and raised a diehard Michigan State fan, and watching hundreds of games over the years, and having this team play my employer, somebody that I'd worked for 5 or 6 years at this point, that I'd developed personal relationships with all of the coaches, enjoyed being around them, watching and cheering on these student athletes, and that day, my two worlds collide in a basketball arena in St. Louis. There's certainly nobody else in that building that was a diehard Michigan State fan and a diehard MTSU fan. You can't dream that up. Never would I have thought in all of my years and all my years working in professional sports and collegiate sports that my employer would be playing my favorite team, and it was going to come down to such a marquee moment, and one that will literally live on in the realms of great March Madness games forever and ever.
I'd been hired right out of grad school as an intern and took over men's basketball mid-season. After conference play had already started, I took over in January. So I was still kind of learning on the fly and improving my skills and making sure I had everything down. And boom, we're in the NCAA tournament. We're playing Michigan State, and they're favored to win the whole thing. And it was just, obviously unlike anything I'd experienced, and still today unlike anything I've experienced.
So the game starts, and we get the possession, and boom, Giddy hits a 3. And I'm sitting on press row right next to Mark Owens, just like I'm sitting on press row now, kind of give him that thigh slap, because you can't clap your hands on press row, which would be a really problem later on in the game, but slap him and go, man, that's a good start. Then boom, we hit another 3. And we thought in order for us to win, we had to shoot the ball really well. And so we hit a couple 3s right out of the gate. And I think about every player on our team hit a 3 early. Jaquan hit 1, Reggie hit 1, Giddy hit 1, and so Darnell hit 1. So it's like all guys are chugging right now. And I keep waiting for the timeout. When's Coach Izzo going to call a timeout? I'm kind of watching their bench, and they're talking back and forth, the assistant coaches to Coach Izzo, and finally, boom, takes the timeout, after I think we hit another 3. And look at the scoreboard, and the score is 15 for the Blue Raiders, 2 for Michigan State. And I remember looking up there and telling Mark, I said, look at that, that might be a sign. That was our seed. Those are our seeds, 15-2. And I'll never forget that was the first time out, and so I'm thinking, well, that might be a good sign, but let's kind of keep this thing rolling until halftime.
I usually work the player comp table and will call until about halftime. It went a little bit longer that game, but I got in shortly into the second half. And I just took my seat, 20 rows up into our section, and I'm sitting back and I'm taking it in, and I'm looking over at the Michigan State section, and there's people over there that I recognize. And of course they had a nice crowd there, but it's my opinion that, they've been here, they've done this before. This is a first round game, they're a 2 seed. So I don't think their fans traveled in mass numbers like they typically do, because they'll make it to the second weekend and probably or likely beyond. Now again, we had a great contingency of fans there. But what was so unique when I walked into that building is that when I looked across behind their bench, those fans that were wearing green were the only people in the building cheering for that team. And the other 14,000 people, the entire lower bowl and the upper level, everybody's cheering for Middle Tennessee State. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. That's not just like playing in here in the Murphy Center and having the whole home crowd behind you. We had an entire building of strangers behind us. The Syracuse fans, the Dayton fans, the random fan from St. Louis was a Blue Raider fan that day. And it was completely electrifying to feel that in a building that we own this place and this is our time. Some of the memories of the actual game start to blend together, because it was a bit surreal for me. Again, growing up a Spartan fan, I thought this team was going to go to the national championship. And again, before the brackets came out, that would be my pick. They've been playing fantastic. And the brackets are unveiled, and I thought, oh, why? Of all the teams in the tournament, why do we have to be playing Michigan State? But in those moments, sitting in the chair, that all went away. Like, we've got this. Like, this team is playing lights out. And I mean, I feel like when Reggie had that dunk, like, that was the stamp. It felt like to me that, like, we've got this. Like, they're not going to come back. Like, we're going to pull off arguably the biggest upset in the history of the NCAA. I still feel like this to this day. No team has been shocked like Michigan State was. I truly believe that, just because they were so red hot.
We're all happy. I mean, we're walking around and knowing that the second half, when they get into the locker room, it's going to be really important to us. So I didn't want to jinx a thing. Did not want to jinx a thing. So I remember I had to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't find like the media bathroom in the underneath the stands in the bowels of the St. Louis arena. And so I'm walking around and just finally decide, you know what, I'm going to use our locker room. When the guys go out to warm up and everybody leaves, I'm going to go in there, because I don't want to talk to those guys. I don't want to talk to any coaches. Don't want to jinx it. It's kind of like having a no-hitter going. You don't want to be the guy that jinxes it and talks in the dugout. So I go walking into the bathroom, into the locker room, and when I just boom, almost immediately run into Kermit, and it's like, he's like, gives me kind of that little eyeball, like, hey, Chris, and I'm like, hey, coach, because he probably didn't want to talk to me either, thinking the same thing, and that was all that was said, and I'm just praying that, boy, I hope I didn't jinx this thing. So come out for the second half, and again, that we led this thing. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but we led it from wire to wire.
When's Michigan State going to be who they have been for the last couple of months? And so, but the mood was, people were so into the game, excited, and the entire arena became Blue Raider fans. Those, except for the small group of that were wearing green, everybody else was pulling, as everybody was flowing into the arena for their next game, and people were really, really behind us. And then the nerves were setting in on me a little bit. I moved around. I couldn't sit still. I was down in the hallway. I went to the locker room. I was behind the bench. It was I don't know. I can't really. It's hard to describe the feeling I had. But the game ends, and I remember being in the hallway down behind the media area, behind our locker room, and I couldn't control my emotions. I was excited. I was jumping up and down. The players come walking in like it was just another game.
After the game ended, it was just my emails flooded. People were texting me who I had no idea who they were, trying to get interviews set up. And it was just, nonstop that whole day and the next day, with interview requests for Coach, for Reggie, for Giddy, for whoever it was, and I think Jaquan had a few, and it was, I mean, almost every one of the starters pretty much had interviews the next couple days, and then we had the open locker room session at practice the next day when we were preparing for Syracuse, and it went from the day before Michigan State, there might have been 4, 5, 6 people in there kind of making their circles, asking questions, and then the day before Syracuse, after we beat Michigan State, you can barely get in the locker room.
One of the things that really came to my mind, I was a student here in 1982, and I saw then what I thought would never be topped as the biggest win in the history of our school and our basketball program. March 11th, 1982, Middle Tennessee 50, Kentucky 44. There were probably 2,500, 3,000 Middle fans that got into Memorial Gym that night. Now it's probably 25,000 people who say they were actually there, but I didn't think that would ever be topped. And to me, the one thing about the Kentucky game is there can never be another first one, and it will always stand alone there. But the Michigan State game, as far as obviously seeding wise, all of that, it's going to be hard to beat that, and still right now it ranks #1 as the biggest win in school history. And as far as I'm concerned, that's in any sport right now.
The thing though is you go from the media room to the locker room and you pass all these different little passages where your cell phone would go, there were dead spots in there for me, and so I would be walking and for 2 minutes feel nothing in my pocket. Then I'd be getting all my dings, bing, 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 and just getting text message after text message and phone calls and all those kind of things, because when you're underneath the stands, you have very little appreciation other than seeing it for yourself in past years, what's really going on across the country, that all sports eyes flip to you. Then you hear all the stories about, well, I was watching, the office stood still, and even non-MTSU people came in and watched it. So everybody affiliated with MTSU, I think, has a story where they were and how they watched the last few minutes of that basketball game. And so that was really a cool thing. So you don't really realize the impact until a little bit later when you're sorting through it all and you're looking at all the news accounts. And then walking down the streets of St. Louis the next day, and really before we played Syracuse, that we'd run into fans and they'd just stop and clap their hands. It was like, I didn't do anything, but they see you wearing Middle Tennessee stuff and they wanted to talk to you about it. The Wisconsin was there at the same time, and they seemed particularly happy that I think that Michigan State got knocked out, but that was a lot of fun walking around and being part of that. That was, at the time, was the greatest upset in NCAA tournament history. And I thank Coach Davis and the staff, and man, the players were just terrific that day.
It wasn't even before the final buzzer, and my phone was already going off from donors and fans that have my cell phone number that are calling asking about tickets. How do I get tickets? How do I get more tickets? I want to make sure that I have tickets for the next round. So it was fantastic, but it became instantly overwhelming because I hadn't really been in that situation prior. It was so crazy that I was up responding to text messages and answering a few calls, and I actually missed the team bus back to the hotel. Now, luckily, we weren't very far away, but I walked the handful of blocks back, and there were waves of emotions going through me at that time, of course. I mean, again, my childhood Spartans are out of the tournament, but this team that I have worked for and supported all season, we're alive and we're moving on, and I was so excited for what was to come next.
I mean, at the time, I was still, I had still not been promoted full-time. I was still handling, I think women's golf was getting ready to go on the road or something right around that time. They had something going on. And then baseball season was starting up too. So we had somebody covering baseball at the time, but I was kind of keeping an eye on everything just to make sure it all looked good because it was still my sport, and I wanted to make sure everything was going smoothly even though I couldn't handle it myself. So I mean, I was not just worried about men's basketball when I was out there either, and it was quite the weekend.
The Kentucky game was on regional television. tipped off at 8:30, or actually 9:30 at night. The next morning, a lot of people didn't know this happened when we beat Kentucky until the next morning. Again, the Michigan State game, it was instantaneous, and we were a household name across the country. So I think we became a known quantity, a national brand, and what happened in a span of about 2.5 hours on a Friday afternoon changed everything.
The question of how it still lives on is, I mean, we still got the banners, we still got the pictures in the concourse. Those memories will never go away, you know, and so it's embedded in our school's history. Anybody that's an MTSU sports fan will always look at that day as one of the great days, you know, and so it lives on. It's got a life of its own. I think people like to share it and talk about it and those kind of things. And even years later, like when I travel, and when we went to Michigan for the football game, I had several people stop me and thank me for us beating Michigan State that year.